about 15 to 20 minutes into this episode, you're going to hear a difficult and beautiful story about a woman on her deathbed and her sons saying goodbye. It's a love story. It's a sad story. It's a story about life that, to me, represents one of the most concentrated examples of exactly what we're talking about here on this podcast: sacred human connection. The hard truth that I'm sure most of us would rather not be true is that there are moments in our life of shared grief and loss. And in those moments of grief, when we're in that place, and some of our most sacred moments of human connection actually show up. It's in that place, and sometimes only upon reflection and the graceful space of time gone by, that we feel God in that space between us. I am so glad you're here today listening with us. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Between Podcast. This is your host, Matt Matson, and I'm especially excited to welcome you inside today's sacred conversation. Do you have people in your life, like in your real life, like maybe like a neighbor or a parent of one of your kids' friends or whatever, someone in your life who you know, who you think is wonderful and who you have a vague sense of their professional life, but you haven't really spent enough real time with them to like unearth the layers of brilliance that they carry around with them? Today's guest is that for me. She literally lives in my neighborhood. We're on Zoom, but we're like 2 blocks away from each other right now. Her son is one of the most trustworthy kids in my oldest daughter's life. So she holds a special place in my heart because of that. And she happens to have this wildly fascinating career and professional life that I only know about kind of on the surface. Paula, in a minute, I'm going to read just 5 lines from your official bio. I'll read them here in a minute, but let me start by just saying hi. And I'm really, really grateful you said yes to joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. I am so looking forward to this time with you, and you're exactly right. It's one of those like our paths cross all the time, and yet we've never just got to sit
Yeah.
across from each other.
Yeah. I
So
feel like we had like a coffee meeting, like, but that was now, I don't know how many years ago it was now. Like, and we had a coffee meeting to do this, to like really like hang out and get to know, because we know there's some
yeah,
like connection in what we're doing.
right.
But that's been a long time ago. And so I'm
I
grateful
know.
for this.
Me
All right.
too.
Here are 5 lines from your official bio. All right. Number 1: Paula Stephens is an ordained chaplain in the Zen Buddhist tradition. Number 2: she wrote a book a while back and spent a significant part of her career helping parents overcome the unspeakable grief of losing a child. Number 3: she is a Gold Star mom, wife of an SVU detective, mom to a firefighter, and mom to 2 other boys who are incredible humans. All right, that's 3 out of the 5. All right, number 4: she's also a nationally recognized speaker on resilience and healing from adversity. And number 5: she spends a large amount of her time now serving people in the helping professions, where she helps the helpers overcome compassion fatigue and burnout. Paula, will you pick any one of those 5 lines from your professional and personal biographical details that I just shared? And I don't know, tell us more about the things in your life that make you most proud.
That's such a good question. I guess it's easy for me to talk about my kids and my husband, and so I am super proud of that. And I'm painfully transparent about my life and about my life experiences. And so, it gives me joy to say that I'm on my second marriage, and like I have a first draft marriage, which was fantastic. And my first draft marriage gave me my 3 older boys, and to which I'm eternally grateful. And I'm hoping that Scott is the final draft. I think he is. I'm like pretty sure that this is it for me, but one never knows. But yeah, like I really like Scott is just such an incredible human, and I feel like every day I'm like so grateful that he tolerates me and that he just, you know, puts up with all of my shit and all of my everything. So yeah, I think that what I am most proud of is the fact that I have a husband who is painfully tolerant of me.
Mm.
Hmm.
Are you say you're transparent about your life? We'll dig into some areas where you're very transparent about your life and where you have been, and you've used that to help other people. But like, is that why are you transparent about? Were you just always that way? Are you just somebody who just likes to share everything?
Oh, no, 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 no. Like, um, I would say I spent a very significant part of my life wanting to like rub out and cover up the parts that, in my perception, were like not the pretty parts or not the places that, like, you didn't want to put a spotlight on some of that stuff. And I think by the time, you're once divorced, add the, I mean, like, it started to become painfully apparent to me that like trying to hide stuff was so much work.
Mm,
And so, and then I think, when my son Brandon died in 2010, that, I mean, what I found, and this is, I can only speak for myself, was the only way to live is by full transparency and vulnerability. And if you are that way and the person that you're in conversation with can't sit with that, then that's okay.
all right. So let's, there's like five or six topics that I want to weave together in our conversation. So we'll see if that all happens. But let's start with Buddhism for a minute, if that's okay. You're a Zen Buddhist chaplain. Um, so let's dig into Zen Buddhism for a minute. We got people from a lot of spiritual backgrounds who listen to this podcast and who participate in the Between community. So for someone, let's say someone's listening and they only know Zen Buddhism as like quotes from the internet or like those little rock gardens with the tiny trees. I think that I don't know. Will you give us a Zen Buddhism 101 course for a moment, just in case somebody listening's like, well, I kind of don't really know what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I laugh because I was actually at my like my home, my Buddhist home, which is
Mhm.
down in Santa Fe, and a moving truck drove by and it said Zen Moving Company, and I was like, and you're right, it's everywhere. It's like, and people say, well, that's so Zen, and
What's Zen about
did,
moving? That moving like is
I
the
know.
least Zen thing I could think of. Sorry.
I think that's their marketing thing though,
Maybe,
right? It's
maybe
like
that's it. Yeah.
it's so cool, like it's so peaceful, and so you're right. Like most people know it as like they use it as a verb, like it's so zen, right? So let me answer that in kind of two parts. One is just like sort of the academic answer, which is, you know, Zen Buddhism. If we follow it back, it started in India with the Buddha. It made its way to China, where it's called Chan, Chan, Chan Buddhism. And then it made its way to Japan. It became Zen, Zen. And then it made its way to the West. And again, like all of these are iterations of, the teachings of the Buddha. And so the fundamentals, the principles are very much, what the Buddha taught. And, Buddhism, just like any other spiritual tradition, you have your Protestants, you have your Catholics, you have your
Hmm.
Methodists, you have, and it's not unlike that. Like there's Zen Buddhism, there's Tibetan Buddhism, there's Pure Land Buddhism. So, just like that. But Zen has made its way very comfortably into the West. And so that's kind of the academic piece, right? So I'll
Yeah.
just, if you have other questions, please follow up. But that's the academic piece. I think maybe what you're more interested in, and maybe what's more interesting to our readers is, or to our listeners is, how am I in relationship with Zen? Right? I mean, maybe that's more interesting. Is
Yeah.
like, how am I in relationship with this thing that really feeds me? And that to me is the more interesting part. And so I'll just kind of say, um, I didn't choose Zen. Like I feel like Zen kind of just fell in my lap, and I was like, okay, this is cool. Because before that, I would I would say I was kind of what I would call like an armchair Buddhist, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
I read Lion's Roar magazine, and I, read some books. I read some Thich Nhat Hanh because he's a good gateway Buddhist to like other things. And but finally it was kind of like I needed to put my stick in the ground, so to speak, or my
Hmm.
flag in the ground, and that's how Zen sort of came to me. Um, so for me, like the pieces of Zen that really resonate, and it isn't necessarily specific to Zen, but um, one is this concept of we are here not just for the enlightenment of our own self and to achieve awakening, which is like this sense of like striving and achievement and pushing, and that's not it. So in Zen, we talk about um, we are here to forego our enlightenment for the benefit of the alleviation of suffering of other beings. And we say of all other beings, right? Which is entirely and completely impossible. Um, like I'm not going to alleviate the suffering of the world, but that is our aspiration, that in every action that we take, we are striving towards, and it's called, the name for it is to be a bodhisattva.
Hmm.
And so a bodhisattva is someone who says, I will forego my own peace, my own uh, alleviation of my own suffering for the benefit of all other beings. And so to me, that, I mean, what greater way to sort of commit to a life of service than to say, I'm going to live in a way that is in service of other people, whether that is someone you see in the grocery store. Um, can I have to tell you a story that this is a very simple alleviation of
Yeah.
suffering story, but it like so warmed my heart yesterday. So I'm driving through the parking lot of the grocery store, and this guy's pulling out, and his Starbucks coffee is on top of his car.
Yeah.
Okay, like to me, that there's suffering that's going to happen,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm looking at this, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, like this guy's going to suffer, right? So this is a very
Hmm.
simplistic way of
Hmm.
looking at it. But what really warmed my heart, so I was like prepared to like roll my window down, wave him, and say, hey. And because there are so many bodhisattvas in the world,
Mm.
right? We're all our own version of a bodhisattva.
Yeah.
Two other people like hail this guy down, and they're like waving at him, and they're like, your car, on top of your car, get your coffee. And like
Yeah.
it was like so heartwarming to me to like see this moment of like so many people stepping into like alleviating the suffering of
Yeah.
a sentient being, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, right? And it could be that simple. You certainly do not have to take it as far as I have in making a career of it. So there's that piece, right? Um, and then there's this other piece of Buddhism that when I like took this in and I learned about this, it landed with me in a way that was like so comforting.
Mm.
And it goes back to the Buddha. You're welcome to ask me whatever you want to ask me about the
Yeah.
Buddha. I'm happy to talk about it. But he was just a dude.
Hmm.
He's just a guy. Nothing special. He's not a savior. He's not a god. He's just a dude. And but one of the things that he taught and that resonates with me is that we all possess Buddha nature. Like you have Buddha nature. I have Buddha nature. Um, I believe dogs have Buddha nature. Not
Mm.
everyone agrees with me. Doesn't matter. But and that we're all in possession. Like we can all become a Buddha.
Yeah.
Like that's not in question.
Yeah.
That is not in question. And I've spent time with people who I could say, boy, that person is not a Buddha. Like
Mm.
that's not. But the point here is that we all possess the capacity to become a Buddha,
Yeah.
and we all have Buddha nature. And it's not striving. To me, it's not striving towards becoming something, someone. It is peeling back everything that's keeping me from being that.
Mm.
And like a real core principle of Zen is meditation and being in meditation. And one of my favorite teachers says, we sit in meditation not to become enlightened, or not to achieve something or to strive towards something, but we sit with the patience of letting things dissolve away so that our purest nature can come forth.
Mm.
And I like that image. And I like that there is no one that I can't sit with, have a conversation with, that I can't say this person is a Buddha just like me.
Yeah.
They're no different.
So let's take this conversation to like a really practical job. You are a not just a Zen Buddhist, you are a Zen Buddhist chaplain. That is a part of your career, your profession, your vocation. What is that? What does that job look like? Will you put us, I mean, like just tell us stories about what doing that work looks like. I mean,
Yeah.
practically. I want to imagine it.
So, I mean, there's one side of it that's like the very practical side is that, I did my clinical training in a hospital.
Mhm.
I did
Mhm.
2,000 clinical hours in a hospital, doing clinical pastoral education, which is a whole system of educating. And I have, let me just say, like, I have this huge bias towards CPE, clinical pastoral education,
Yeah.
that I think that anybody who does spiritual work should do a unit of CPE.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I just like, I really do feel that, because you're meeting the people that aren't your neighbors per se. Like
Yeah.
you're meeting the people who end up in the hospital, and these are predominantly people who are uninsured, who had an accident, that are not having access to medical care on the daily. And so, being in a hospital really gives you this, like, you're looking at the slice of America that,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not getting to pick my socioeconomic, choices here.
Yeah.
But so the practical, it's sort of the answer of like, what does that look like, is like you go do your clinical hours in a hospital.
Yeah.
And then I worked in the hospital for a couple of years, with the title of chaplain. And the title chaplain is actually it should be a non-denominational
Right.
title.
Yeah.
And that's how it's practiced is, and when I say I'm a chaplain, like, it's assumed for most people that I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
It's 9 times out of 10,
Yeah.
which, so I was sitting in the ICU one day. I was working with this family who their person was getting taken off of life support, and I'm sitting there, and it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and so I'm just sitting at the nurse's station, and this doctor walks in, and he didn't know me, he didn't know who I was, and he like and I can see him like trying to figure out like why, and I'm not in scrubs, I'm in street clothes,
Yeah.
and he's trying to figure out who's this person sitting at the nurse's station, right? And so he turns around and he looks at my name tag and he goes, "Oh, you're the chaplain. Oh, you work for the big guy upstairs, huh?" And he's like, "Good for you." And it was all I could do, Matt, not to say, "By big guy, do you mean the fat guy
Yeah.
in the Chinese restaurant?" Because I think we're talking about two different big guys,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I said, "You're right. I work for the big guy." And like, what does it matter? Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
whatever, dude,
Right.
like, knock yourself out. And so, yeah, so a chaplain truly is like, we're there, and it doesn't matter what I am or who I am. When I
Yeah.
walk in a room, I am there to say, how are you? Like,
Yeah.
how is your day unfolding? And there's nothing more humbling than walking in a room and having somebody say, "Who are you?" Because you're the 10th person to come in their room today, right?
Yeah.
And I would say I'm part of the spiritual care team. Get the F out. I don't want to talk about God.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, yeah, okay, right? And to which I would often answer, like, I don't want to talk about God either.
Yeah.
So is there something else you want to talk about?
Yeah.
you know, so, or they would say, "Come on in." Oh my gosh, yes. What church do you go to? Like, I'm
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
like, it's not about me. Like, it's not
Yeah.
about what church I go to, or because I don't go to church, right? Um, but really, and I don't know, do you want stories? Because I got great stories.
I
Do
bet
you
you
want a
do.
really good, you want a story about love? Can I give you a love story?
Yes.
So I'll tell you my love story. So it was my very first overnight, ever. Like, I was an intern. I was like as green as they come. And I show up on my shift, and I go to take, I reach out to the chaplain who I was taking shift change from. And she said, I'm up in ICU, um, room 232. Like, I'll never forget it. Room 232. She said, come meet me up here. I said, okay. So I come up, and she said, this woman has coded twice. She was flight for life in from up north. Um, we're waiting for her children to get here. And so we're doing everything we can to keep her alive. We're waiting for her kids to show up. And she hands me the pager and was like, see you later. I was like, oh my God, like I had never seen a code blue.
Yeah.
It's horrific. It's horrible. Like, and so she said, wait till the kids get here. And so I waited. These two young men come in, they're like 22 and 25, which are like, about the same age as my older kids.
Yeah.
And so it was like seeing my kids walk in the door and like knowing they're looking at their mom. And they I'm standing in front of the ICU door, and I meet them to the side, and I kind of give them, I said, you know what, your mom coded. Um, she's she's stable at this moment. Would you like to go in and talk to her? What would you like to do? And the younger son was so sad. And he said, I cannot go in. I cannot see her like that. I mean, there's tubes, there's people, there's poking, there's prodding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, um, it's not comfortable to see. And it's certainly not comfortable if it's your mom, the person who like helped you learn to ride a bike and, was the tooth fairy and the Easter bunny and
Yeah.
was Santa Claus, like all of these things to you. Like this person represents your whole history. And the older son, like the oldest children do, he was like, I need to say goodbye. And he goes, but I'm not ready. I said, okay, okay. He said, we want to go out to the waiting room. Okay. So I walk him out to the waiting room. We come back. The moment I hit the door, she codes. And when a code goes off, it goes over, they make an announcement over the loudspeaker, code blue, room 232. And the boys knew that was their mom's room. So they come rushing back in. They're doing compressions, not to get too graphic, but like, she's practically naked. She has nothing on her.
Yeah.
She's a mess. There's urine. It's just not a pretty sight. And the boys come rushing in because they know that's their mom. And the younger boy still is like, I can't. And the older boy says, I don't know if I can do this. And he pokes his head around, and it's like there's 12 people in this room. And he said, I can't go in there. And I said, you can. I said, I will push them aside. I will tell them you need in the room.
Yeah.
Just tell me when you're ready to go. And he sat there and he took a couple breaths and he said, okay, I'm ready. And I walked to the room and I said, family's coming in. And they stop compressions. They all step aside. And it makes me cry every time I tell this story, Matt. And so this like 25-year-old guy like leans down into his mom's ear and he's just whispering, he goes, I love you. Like it makes me cry to tell the story. He says, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And he just was repeating it like over and over and over. And normal sinus rhythm, her heart rate came back. And so I always say, like, my religion is love.
Oh.
Because I've seen it happen. Like I've seen in that moment, she's sedated, she's naked. There's people like treating her body like a rag doll. Like she's not even human. And in that moment, just that. Like it was just,
Yeah. Is there any better example that you or I could have come up with of what this idea of sacred human connection looks like in its most concentrated form? I don't know. You and I don't know. I don't know what happened in that story. You don't know what happened in that story. The doctors don't know what happened in that story, but that story happened. And that's truth. Man, that is beautiful. Yeah, sure. I like that story. That was a good
yeah,
one for you to
it's a
share
love
here,
story.
Paula. Yeah, it
It's a
was.
love story. Yeah, yeah. But I think, the other hard part about being a chaplain I mean, one, very rarely are they those beautiful stories. And the mom did die,
Yeah.
but she didn't until the boys got to say their goodbyes.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a, that's a beautiful takeaway. But, and I also, I remember, and this is the hard part of like sitting with the human condition and like common humanity is, um, we had had this really horrific car accident come in, and it was like these two cars, and it was caused by somebody who was under the influence of drugs, crashed into this other car. The driver lived, his two friends died. Uh, Three people were killed in the other car, one person survived.
Hmm.
And I went up to the room of the survivor of the car that was hit. And she just was beside herself. She'd lost her sister and two friends. And I mean, it was really hard to sit with her.
Yeah.
And as she processed, like, why did this happen? Like, 12 hours ago,
Yeah.
my life was so different.
Right.
And like, knowing that there was nothing I could say or do that would change that. And it was just listening. Like, it really is like, all I do as a chaplain is listen. I
Yeah.
don't do shit.
Yeah.
Like, I listen. I listen. Like that's my life, is I just listen. And I talked with her, and then I left the room and I went down the hall, and the nurse said, can you go into this room at the other end? It was like all the way at the other end, and she said, can you go talk to the gentleman in room, I don't know, whatever. Sure. And I walk in, and his head is hanging, and he won't make eye contact, and he won't say if he wants me to stay or go. And so I sit for a few minutes. I said, if you don't mind, I'm going to sit here for a few minutes. And I said, and then when you're ready for me to leave, please ask me to leave. I don't need to stay here
Yeah.
if you don't want me. And he let me sit for a couple minutes, and he said, my life is over. He said, I was driving a car last night, and I killed people, and I killed my best friend. And so within the span of not even a half an hour, because neither visit was very long, I sat with both of them.
Yeah.
This kid, I mean, he could have been one of my kids. He
Yeah.
could be,
Sure.
did he do a horrible thing? 100%.
Yeah.
Horrible, 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 horrible thing. Does he deserve my compassion?
Mm.
Yes, he does.
And
He too is a Buddha.
yeah.
He has
And
Buddha nature.
what you said is that you don't do anything except listen. Yeah, but Paula, like, sometimes what else is there? I mean, in those moments, what else is there but to listen? What bigger thing? What other tool do we have to even slightly alleviate someone's suffering, but to listen? I mean, there's a reason this is a job, right? Like, there's a reason you're not trained to save a life in that moment. You are, though, in a way, you are in the moment you listen, especially to both of those stories, and to
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
be with people in that. I mean, those are really, really powerful stories. And I want to maybe stay in the same vibe that we're in for a moment, because I want to talk about grief, if it's okay with you. I'm sure I'm not alone in that I could tell stories about how some of the moments in my own life, some of some of the deepest and most God-filled, most holy moments of my life were also some of the most difficult. There were moments when I was with people grieving someone who had died, uh, sharing grief together. You know a lot about grief. You mentioned your son, Brandon, who died in 2010, and I know that shaped your life in a significant way. Still does. Will you tell us what you know about grief? Tell us what you know about maybe the importance of person to person, soul to soul connection, the importance of listening, the importance of all the things you're talking about when someone is grieving.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God, Matt, I like never, ever, ever in my life wanted to be an expert on grief or like, I don't even know if I am an expert, but like, I definitely like,
Yeah.
I would say I'm some sort of like a subject matter expert to some
Yeah.
degree. And that was, oh my God, I would have done anything in the world except be a subject matter expert on grief. Like,
Yeah.
not the job I ever wanted. But that was sort of how I made sense of it,
Yeah.
like, was to figure it out in my own way. Um, and I think you're right. Like there is a lot of opportunity for like deep connection when we
Yeah.
sit with someone. But I also think, and I'm going to push back a little bit and say that we live in a culture that is so grief adverse.
Mm.
And we live in a culture that is so uncomfortable with anything that isn't feel good.
Yeah.
Good vibes only,
Yeah.
like positive, like it drives me absolutely crazy. And I think that we do so much damage when we cannot sit with someone.
Yeah.
And and so there's the piece that like culturally, I mean, we learn about everything under the sun except grief. And the only two things in life are like life and death and taxes, they say,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And yet, is there ever any time in our lives when we sit and learn about grief, death, dying? No, absolutely not. I
Yeah.
mean, it's and so like my soapbox would be like we have to, as people, as human beings, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And and we have to do that for the long haul.
Yeah.
Like I always say, like, don't pat yourself on the back because you brought a casserole. That casserole got put in the freezer with 12 other casseroles that
Yeah.
then got put in the trash because they don't have the time, energy, fortitude to eat what you brought, to thaw it out, to do, like, be the person who shows up 6 months, 6 years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so what I would like when I talk about like grief, like, one, it's not short term, it's not 365 days.
Mm.
And that's what we like. So one, we're super uncomfortable with it. We don't want to, and I think part of that uncomfortableness is we're so afraid we're going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
People are literally paralyzed by not wanting to say something wrong. So they have all of these horrible platitudes. And if your listeners take away nothing from this entire time that we're together, I'm going to say this. If your sentence starts with at least,
Mm.
you just shut your pie hole. Just don't. Say at least I could shut my mouth right now.
Yeah.
Like that, that's how that should finish. Is if
Yeah.
you're going to start with at least, you better just stop talking
Yeah.
because nothing can come good out of at least. Like I had a dear friend come over the day after Brandon died. She said, "Can I come see you?" I said, "Of course." She sat down and she said, "At least." And I didn't know what was going to come out of her mouth. And at
Yeah.
that point, I wasn't as attuned to sort of some of these platitudes. And she said, at least he doesn't have to grow old and have all the pains of old age. I mean, are you just so grateful that he'll never have gray hair? He'll never get cancer. He'll never have Alzheimer's. Like, are you just so grateful for that?
Mm.
Nope, I'm
No.
not.
No, not even a little.
No,
Yeah.
no. Like, am I not grateful that, like, I'll never see him fall in love. I'll never have grandkids. Like, a thousand things, right? No.
There's
And it was
also
so hurtful.
I mean, I think in folks who spend a lot of time in faith spaces and have a lot of faith language, like there's also well, at least they're in a better place now. And
You
uh,
don't know that.
yeah, yeah. And also
Right?
like, what? No, like, well, no, I want
Yeah,
them to be here right now in my living room right now. That is the only
absolutely.
better place I can
Yep.
imagine in that moment,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, God just needed an angel.
Mhm.
Well, he can take yours. He takes
Yeah.
your angel then.
Yeah.
I'm not done with my
I'm
angel yet. So
sure. Yeah.
the list of
Yeah.
platitudes. And so this goes back to like what we were saying around like being in conversation with people, like sitting in that space. Again, it goes back to like if you're uncomfortable, you're right where you need to be.
Yeah.
Don't move. Like sit with that.
Yeah.
And you can even, again, to this point of like painful transparency, say, I have no idea what to say. I have
Yeah.
no idea what to do for you. My heart is broken for you. And I know it's not broken in the same way that yours is.
Yeah.
And shit, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this is silly. I'm gonna change the tone here for a moment, but it's on the same topic. When I was in high school, I went to school, real tiny little high school. Everybody in town knows absolutely everybody. There's no secrets. There's everybody knows everybody. And there was a young lady named Christy who had graduated the year before, gotten a horrible car accident and died. And she had been in our high school, and she was just this incredible girl. She was just so cool. She played. She was the only girl on our men's soccer team that went far into the state tournament. And I mean, she was just this like special human being, just a light. And so when the town lost Christy, it felt it. And gosh, it was this deep loss. And anyway, I mean, going through that as a kid, as a high schooler, was actually a really powerful experience to learn about the realities of life and the realities of grieving and the complications of families and uh, the messiness of relationships and all of that. And anyway, the reason I started bringing this up is because you talked about being in an uncomfortable situation. Is that I have this really vivid memory of after her funeral, there was a service at the high school, and the entire high school gym was packed with the entire town and people from other towns and her family. And it was this beautiful service. And afterwards, my best friend, who, he's probably a senior, I was probably a junior in high school. We're a couple of, sporty high school boys, awkward and weird. And this is the 1990s or whatever. And I remember like we walked out in front of the high school, and like I don't think I'd ever hugged this guy before. He was like my best friend, but like that's not we didn't do that. Our male friendships in the 90s were different. And uh I and like we hugged, but we hugged in such a way where we like shook hands first and then hugged with our hands in the middle. And then like that hug, that silly, and then he like called me out on it. He was like, "Dude, what are we doing?" And that moment will live with me forever because it was raw, it was messy, it was super vulnerable. It was he and I trying to figure out in the uncomfortableness of that moment what to do, and then calling out the discomfort of actually being in it. And I actually feel like that's a bit of a metaphor for, at the very least, the awkward hug is real. Like that was one of the more real things that happened that day, despite the funeral, despite the casseroles and the visits to the homes of the people. That awkward hug will live with me forever as almost like a symbol of grief and of the reality of grief. Like we're still here. It's still weird. This whole world is messy, and so is this
Yeah.
moment. And uh, there's not much that you don't have to explain it like that. Anyway, I don't know if that made any sense at all, but that vivid memory popped back up in my mind as like being in the discomfort uh, is probably exactly where you're supposed to be. That's how it's probably supposed to feel if you're doing it right.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable in just about any situation, grief related, um, just because of the work I do. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Like
Yeah.
I don't think that the average layperson needs to be comfortable in that.
Mm.
I think what we need to do is make sure that we're coming and acting from a place of compassion for that other person, not imagining or knowing how they feel or what they
Yeah.
need in that moment. Um, and I think that's we are also like such a culture of like fixers,
Yeah.
and so much of what we say or do in those moments is to alleviate our own discomfort.
Yeah.
And so like kind of doing that self check of like, do I feel compelled to like say something or do something because I'm uncomfortable,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And all that takes is, and this is again, you know, part of my practice. And mindfulness is very secular. Like
Yeah.
mindfulness is not a religious tradition in any way, shape, or form. But um, to to be mindful enough to just drop into your own experience in the body and think like, where am I feeling this? Like, how is this coming up for me?
Mm,
What is it? What is it that I'm trying to do? Am I trying to fix this person?
mhm,
And oftentimes it's, this person's really hurting and I love this person and I don't want them to hurt. Um, yeah, a little side story on that one is I had some, so Brandon died in October. And so the holidays were a shit show. And my dearest friend in all the world, kind of over the holidays, she said, let's double date you and Scott and her and her husband. And we went to see do you remember Meet the Fockers?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And she felt so awful. She was like, she just felt awful. And there was nothing she could do. She said, let's go to this movie, right?
Yeah.
So we meet at the theater. We go in. It's less than 90 days probably since Brandon had died. I bawl through the whole movie.
Mm,
I sit there and I cried and I cried and I cried. And I left and I was so angry. And I said to Scott, I was like, what kind of horrible mom am I that I can go to like a comedy and laugh?
yeah.
Like I am a horrible mother. And like who I was just I just felt horrible. And and my friend felt horrible. And I didn't blame her. Like this had nothing to
Sure.
like I wasn't like emotionally bypassing my own grief by saying this is your fault.
Yeah.
Um, but later she said, I was trying so hard to make you feel good.
Mm, yeah.
Like she and I have had like really good conversations. And she said, I wanted so bad to take away something that,
Yeah.
that pain for you. And, I just remember like, and so in her effort to love me, like that came from a place of like deep love.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it just wrecked me,
Yeah. Sure.
and she didn't mean to, right? And so we really have to like check ourselves, like,
Yeah.
what am I doing here? You know?
Yeah. You speak on resilience. That word resilience is a part of your vocabulary, and there's obvious connection to living with grief and then building resilience. But I feel like that word resilience is like it requires a recognition of suffering, right? I mean, it's a word that asks us to go beyond what we sometimes feel like we can handle. How do people become more resilient? How have you become more resilient? How do you help other people become more resilient is maybe an easier thing to talk about. But I mean, how do you empower people, like other people in their life, to
Yeah.
be resilient?
I know you can see me like leaning forward and just like, yeah. Um, I wish people didn't have to be resilient. That's what I wish.
Yeah.
I wish that, and I don't know if you've heard this little story, but or I don't know what you call it, a parable. Um, but why don't we quit pulling people out of the river and go upstream and see
Yeah.
why they're drowning?
Yeah.
Like I want to go upstream. Like I want to. That's where I want to start. But we can't. I mean, we can and we should start with like, can we get to the point where we're upstream and people aren't falling in the river? But we're not there. So the alternative is like, how do we teach people to be resilient? And um, the definition of resilience is like bouncing back, right? So you have your baseline, and an event happens and you drop below baseline, and then resilience is what allows you to compensate and get back to baseline. Um, and I like to think of it in the context of like, can we not return to baseline, but can we actually bounce forward into a place of like greater depth
Mm,
of using your suffering to become more compassionate, to be closer to your own Buddha nature. Um, and not that I wish bad things to happen to people, but the most incredible humans I know are incredible because they've had really awful things happen
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
Hands down. Like I don't know anybody, that I don't deeply respect and love, that hasn't had horrible things happen to
Yeah.
them, and that is why they are who they are. So, I think with the number one thing I think with resilience is recognizing that suffering is part of the human condition. Um, and we need to be and cultivate more self compassion. Like there is compassion, for other people. Um, but part of being resilient is developing this deep sense of self compassion,
Yeah.
that I, as much as anyone else in the world, deserve compassion, deserve to be happy, deserve kindness, deserve love. And so I'm a huge advocate of like really cultivating self compassion,
Yeah.
because we don't do that in this culture.
Yeah.
Right? It's just very, and a favorite quote of mine is like compassion is incomplete without the self.
Mm.
And so if you're not being, if I say to you, Matt, oh gosh, Matt, you should just not, don't be so hard on yourself, right? And then I turn around and beat myself up because I ate half of a cheesecake for breakfast this
Yeah.
morning, and I think I should be a better person than that, and a good person wouldn't have cheesecake for breakfast. Whatever. Like obviously that's my own stuff, right? And so the piece of resilience, I think, is one, it starts with really cultivating compassion for yourself and saying, this is the human condition, and other people too have suffered, and other people
Yeah.
too have had this experience.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's that piece. And I would say, to anybody listening, Kristen Neff is a self-compassion researcher, and she has I think it's an 8 or 10 week course that anybody can sign up for. Hands down, the best thing you'll ever do for yourself as an
Cool.
individual. Hands down, like I took it a couple of years ago, just out of curiosity, and oh my God, like literally life changing.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
that I think it's 8 weeks, I don't know, but and I did it online. I think it was after COVID. And so I think resilience starts with like really being kind to yourself. Like,
Yeah.
can you hold your own heart and say like, I deserve to be happy, and I deserve to find a way forward.
So a lot of the work that you do now is supporting people in the helping professions, right? And I'm sure coming out of COVID, there is a new light shined on people in the helping professions for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And boy, the idea of burnout, by the way, and the idea of the need for self compassion because of burnout, man, that topic keeps coming up. We're 4 years out of COVID, and it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. Um, so I'm curious. A lot of these people in the helping professions are experiencing compassion fatigue or burnout, and it's I think that's related to the work that we're doing here at Between. I think if someone is feeling compassion fatigue, it becomes really hard for them to build new relationships, right? Like if they are so burnt out from opening their soul and handing is all of it away, it's really hard for them to welcome new people in or to deepen their relationships that are really important to them in their home or in other places, right? Um, anyway, what can you share with anyone out there who might be feeling a little compassion fatigue about how they might be able to manage it, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Um, hmm. Well, I I guess it's important to me to make like a little distinction
Yeah.
here, as we move into this, because it's a really rich conversation, I think, around compassion. Um, it- it- so let me start by saying that compassion in and of itself is comprised of non-compassion elements. So like when compassion is comprised of non-compassion elements, meaning the need to act the need to heal, the need to be of service, like those are non-compassion elements. But what we do is what brings it to a compassionate act. Compassion fatigue is actually a misnomer. Like there
Mhm.
is no compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
Like that's not a thing, um, because compassion itself is self-generating. So, and I'm gonna keep on this. I want to say a little
Yeah.
bit more because this is important to me. Um, so if I see a compassionate act that impacts me, if it it generates compassion in myself for others. So if I see the man help take the coffee off the hood of the car,
Yeah.
right, the roof of the car, that act of compassion cultivates compassion in me. Okay, so we can increase our sort of compassion bucket by witnessing acts of compassion, doing acts of compassion, um, or even um, hearing about acts of compassion. Right. So compassion itself, the nature of compassion is self-generating. It's regenerative in and of
Yeah.
itself. What actually fatigues, and let me also say that compassion itself, so when I witness compassion or I do compassion, and we see this is like the nerdy, like neuroscience part of what I do.
Yeah.
uh, Dopamine and oxytocin are actually released in the brain. Like they've seen this on functional MRIs. Is like when we watch acts of compassion, our brain is like dopamine, oxytocin, like all the feel good stuff, right? So we know that compassion is generating, right? It just generates itself. What isn't generative is empathy. And what it actually, it's not compassion fatigue. What it is empathic distress.
Mm.
Like that's the real term for it. Now we use, and just, everyday lay language,
Sure.
layperson, we would say compassion fatigue. But I think the important distinction here is that we get to the place of empathic distress, which is and it's caused by vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, because you have witnessed so much that you cannot separate yourself from the experience, that you become enmeshed in that experience. You go home and you continue to think about the patient that you saw. You can continue, and I work with a lot of military, and they continue to relive the combat. They continue to relive, they can't let it go. Like that becomes empathic distress.
Yeah.
um, and so what's interesting, and whether you want to say compassion fatigue or you want to say empathic distress, what is part of the antidote, not the full antidote, but part of the antidote is actually compassion itself.
Mm.
Is when I am feeling depleted, right? So to speak to your audience and your question around like the people who are listening who say, gosh, I'm in a helping profession, I'm a teacher, I'm a pharmacist, I'm a pharmacy tech, like fill in the blank, all these helping professions that are just underwater and have been for like 4 years now. Um, Even if it is watching acts of compassion on YouTube videos, like,
Yeah.
like all of these, like and these come up, right? Like there's so many, like, this is one of the things I say when I work with like a lot of the military people, in particular first responders, is, load your Instagram feed or whatever it is with things that feel good,
Yeah.
right? Because that is the antidote. I mean, there's therapy is also the antidote. We
Yeah.
don't. I
Yeah.
collect therapists like baseball cards, so like I love
Yeah.
them. I love them. There's therapists for everything, but the other thing is to cultivate compassion, and it starts with yourself.
Mm.
Like and to hold your own heart and to say, of course I'm exhausted. Who could do this day in and day out? And you can even, and Sharon Salzberg is one of my favorite Buddhists of all
Yeah.
times. I love Sharon Salzberg, and Sharon calls her kind of like nasty inner self her Lucy, and it comes from the Peanuts,
Yeah.
like Charlie Brown
Yeah.
and Lucy. And And she'll say, of course I'm exhausted. And she'll say, and I have to say to Lucy, and Lucy, you need to get off my back on this one.
Mm.
Like, I'm doing the best I can do. And so, to make it sort of like, it's lighthearted, if you will. But,
Yeah.
so for people who are really struggling with being in those helping professions, it, you are not compassionless. And I think that's important to hear. Is like,
Yeah.
it's not something you can't get back. It's not something you're not over the edge. Um, you have just been so saturated, and you're becoming less and less able to not enmesh yourself in that,
Yeah.
to not sit with that. Um, if I'm just going to use nurses as an example, but to sit day in and day out with that cancer patient who's a
Yeah.
35-year-old mom of two kids, and you're a 35-year-old mom of two kids, and all you can do is you just get so enmeshed in that. And so we need to learn boundaries, very important boundaries, but to say, this is horrible, this is awful, and it's not me.
Yeah.
It is someone else, and I am being compassionate when I care for them.
That's
I
actually,
don't know if that's helpful. Is that
it is.
helpful?
Oh, it is.
I don't
I'm
know.
separating compassion from empathy and naming them as two different functions. There are two different, they're probably chemical processes that operate differently in our brain when those two
Mhm.
very different things happen. But for me, I conflate the two ideas, and they just feel like synonyms essentially, right? But no, that's compassion generates more compassion. It fills your heart. Watching it, doing it, observing it, hearing about it, seeing it on your Instagram
Mhm.
feed
Mhm.
fills your heart. Empathy is a real close cousin of compassion, but it also, empathy is very much opening, sort of opening the gate of our own heart and letting the world that we're observing into it. And you do that too much, and a little too much of the world gets into it, right? That's
Mhm.
different than compassion. That's
Mhm.
different than actively generating compassion. That's a fun sort of nerdy
Mhm.
concept to
Mhm.
go into.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
yeah.
actually really, really, I think of, yeah, so many different helping professions. I've been having lots of conversations with uh, faith-based professionals, pastors of one sort or another, who are telling me they are experiencing some version of compassion fatigue or burnout or whatever,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it has to do with all the pain that they see constantly, and it's harder and harder to do their job because of all these outside pressures, and right, like all these things that are, by the way, they have nothing to do with the amount of compassion that they have or the compassion that they show. It's not like they're emptying a bucket of compassion and then they're out of it. That's not what's happening at all. It's that
Mhm.
this all the difficulties of the outside world are getting in, and maybe we're not turning that compassion that we're so good at giving to other people back onto our own hearts. I think that's a really wonderful
Mhm.
vision.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hey, as we close up our time, you and I live in the same neighborhood. We're just blocks from each other. We see the same people every day. We go to the same grocery store. We Our kids go to the same schools. Um, when you look around at our pleasant little peaceful community, this little cul-de-sac filled, SUV filled community, this the delightful little piece of Americana that we live in, what do you see? What do you see in people that are walking around here? What do you see in their eyes? What do you sense their souls need? What do you think they're longing for?
Mhm. Mhm. I think people want to be seen. I think people want to be seen. And I think a lot of times they go about it the wrong way. We're so desperate to be seen
Yeah,
and held as valuable, held as the Buddha, right? Like we want to be the Buddha. We want to be that special person.
yeah.
And we want to be seen for being unique and whatever our talents are. And I think that oftentimes that need to be seen gets manifested in the SUV. It gets manifested in posting pictures of your kids on Instagram because
Yeah.
you want to be seen as you want to be seen, fill in the blank, like as good as a good parent, as successful as fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Instead of the truth of it is you want to be seen. And I'm trying to think of like how best to articulate this, and being willing to be that vulnerable person enough to have those conversations that make you feel seen.
Mm.
And it's the difference between like a like on social media.
Yeah.
It's temporary,
Yeah.
you know, whereas like really being seen, you know, really feeling like, and I think that's, you know, it's one of the things like when I work with the soldiers, um, they are so accustomed to not being seen,
Hmm.
and they are literally told and treated like they're property,
Yeah.
property of the U.S. military. Um, they literally light up when they have felt like they've been seen.
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know what the answer is to that. What do you think? Like, you know, we're in the same neighborhood. Like, what do you do
Yeah.
when you like see one of these neighbors, or and you know that like they're such a lovely human,
Yeah.
and they're really wanting that deeper connection, but they can't seem to get there. Like, what do you think?
Well, I've had the thought often that you said it, and so I'm going to reflect back your words, but uh, we are all so desperately longing for to be seen. I think what a great way. I'll shorthand that to we are so desperately longing for real connection, deep connection, this connection that we felt before, that we knew as a baby, and that has been fleeting in so many parts of our lives since. We built an entire society that for some reason forgot to give us the one thing that we're desperately looking for, which is to be seen, to feel truly connected with others and with this thing around us. And there's like the shortcut to getting there is actually really simple. It's vulnerable connection. It is opening ourselves up in a very real way. And so we know that. I actually think most of us know it. Most of us know that the one thing that would get us the one thing that we need is actually really easy. It's just being vulnerable with people. And yet we avoid it at all costs. And yet we find every excuse we can to look at our phone or to buy a new car or to, repaint our house as a way to distract ourselves from doing the thing, being vulnerable that will get us the thing, true connection, seeing each other. That is that is a big part of what drives me to do this because I feel it. I mean, I think that is part of my life. That is part of my longing. And it is so, I feel like that's all I see in my neighbors. That's all I see in the people that I encounter in their workplace, in my job, in working with college students, which was my career for the last 20 some years. They're so desperate for it and so raw and so real about their desperation. And yet it's so scary to take that one little one little step to be truly vulnerable is a shorthand word. Vulnerable isn't everything, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Mm-hmm.
cliche word that means a little bit more than what it stands for today. But man, I think that is I think you and I are seeing something very similar.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I like that.
Paula, thanks. We've been talking for a long time, and I would like to keep talking for a long time, but let's let our listeners go. I know people can find you at paulastephens.net. Is there anything else you want to recommend to people before we sign off? You always have good book you recommended Thich Nhat Hanh to me earlier, like I don't know, a year ago, and you were like, hey, read this book, and I did, and it was fantastic. It was my first exposure to his writing, and and since I've sort of dove deep into some of it. Anything else you're recommending to people right now? Anything else so people can see the world through your point of view?
Um, y- can I be so bold as to ask for 60 seconds?
Yes,
Okay, maybe 90.
that's
Is
fine.
90 too much? Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'd like to do is I would like to leave people with the loving kindness prayer, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
And so, you know, what I would ask is, and you and I can do this together, we're on Zoom, but no, what I would say is just close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. You know, if you're driving, please don't. If you're listening to this and you can't close your eyes, please don't. But um, you know, allow yourself to just be heavy in the body and put a hand on the heart. And then just noticing that the breath is coming and going, it's sweeping in and it's sweeping out. And in every breath, you are 100% nourished with what you need in that moment. And trusting that you have what you need in every moment. And then what we'll do for the loving kindness prayer is we'll start with ourselves and move out. And I'll say the words, and then you can kind of just silently repeat them to yourself. I'll have a little silent pause in between. So, may I be well. May I be happy. May I be filled with love and peace. And now I want you to think about somebody that you deeply love and cherish. And I want you to bring them as if you're sitting across from them holding hands. And I want you to say to them, may you be well. May you be happy. May you be filled with love and peace. And then I want you to think about all the people who could benefit from those words. And I want you to just simply repeat, all beings everywhere, known and unknown. May you be well. May you be happy. May you be filled with love and peace. And then when you're ready, you can just kind of come back into the moment. And I'll just say deep bows to you, Matt. And may the merit of our time together be of benefit to all. Thank you.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. You know, my favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.